The planet is in the middle of a mass extinction event where life on Earth is really dying off at an alarming rate. And the scientists are clear about the fact that this extinction event is a direct result of human activity.
As possible, markets should be as free and open as possible, in quotes. And in fact, what we know is that unregulated capitalism always leads to the result of monopoly. I mean, that's why Mary what's-her-name invented the monopoly game back in the 1920s, was to demonstrate that. So you got that. And then you've got, you know, a fossil fuel industry, a multi-billion, $100 billion, maybe $1 trillion industry that has been pouring enormous amounts of money into universities, into think tanks, into paid shills, into the same PR firms that worked on the tobacco case, you know, on the 20, 30 years ago, convincing us that you couldn't connect tobacco to any particular case of cancer. It's the exact same thing. They're peddling doubt. You know, in fact, there's a movie about it now called Merchants of Doubt. And I think these two things together are This is the interesting conflation or confluence that's happening right now.
Well, if you really consider that you have to be able to educate the American public to be able to say this is about your children, this is about your grandchildren, this changes the whole face of the world that you think you're living in. How do you overcome the money, though, Tom? I mean, the old idea of, you know, it's the golden rule. The person that has all the gold makes all the rules. That's happening here, isn't it? And well, Citizens United made it worse.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And yet, there are tipping points, and they do tend to come as a consequence of the public either awakening and becoming activist. For example, 35 years ago in this town here in Washington, D.C., the most powerful lobbyists were the tobacco industry. They had everybody cowed. I mean, they made the NRA look tame. They got what they wanted. They lied before Congress, and nobody even challenged them. I mean, they just had so much power. And then a bunch of really good trial lawyers sued them in a way that caused the reality of what they were up to become evident to Americans across the United States. And I think when people kind of woke up and said, holy cow, you know, we've been screwed by these guys, been killed by these guys. I mean, millions of us have been killed by these guys. And now the tobacco lobbyists are among the least powerful in Washington, D.C.
Well, let me give you a little bit of insight to that story, and I just want to know what your reaction is to it. I was involved with that, and now I can tell you it's a whole different level of ugly power that we're confronted with. I'm getting ready to start probably one of the biggest environmental cases in America up in Columbus, Ohio, very shortly in September. But when I compare the political influence and I compare the money influence that we even were confronted with in tobacco, Tom, I would tell you that what we're seeing now is multiplied times 100.
Yeah.
Now, so it's a different threshold that we're confronted with, even from the standpoint of somebody who does this for a living every day. So imagine what the American public confronted with.
I agree, and I understand that, and I think that's why it's taken so long and it's been so difficult. I mean, it's not like, you know, the word about how you know, the fossil fuel industry and deregulated capitalism are starting an extinction just came out last week. I mean, many of us, and I think most of the world, has known about this for decades at the
Talk about this story. This is another story. You hear about it, you'll see an article, something about extinction, and then you'll change the channel and watch The Bachelorette. You know, how serious is that problem? Let's shift from the destruction by way of unregulated capitalism to the destruction of what we've all heard for so long, and that is the climate is changing, and it has the potential to kill the planet.
Yeah. Well, I think The Bachelorette is a terrible problem, Pab. And no, I'm sorry. This is, you know, Leo DiCaprio and I did a movie on this. It's called Last Hours. You can find it at lasthours.org or at greenworldrising.org, excuse me. And, we are killing off species now at a rate that is not all that different. It's actually faster than the initial 10,000-year rate at which species were killed off during the Permian mass extinction, which killed 90% of all life on Earth. We're actually moving faster than that right now because that extinction was caused by some massive volcanic activity in northern Siberia, an area called the Siberian Traps. But it took 10,000 years for those traps to put enough carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to raise the temperature of the Earth 6 degrees. We're doing that in possibly as little as, 1,000 years or 500 years, or maybe even 60 years. I mean, nobody really knows for sure. But we've already passed the tipping point for an ice-free Arctic. That's
isn't the problem, Tom, and you've talked about this before, and this is something people miss, is that it's also methane from the bottom of the ocean that now becomes explain that a little bit so people understand. It's not just that at some point, the tipping point is not simply that we're putting CO2 in there by way of the cars we drive. There's more to that.
Right. We've put the last numbers, and I think they're about 8 years old, were 150 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That's a lot. But the amount of methane trapped in the Arctic as a frozen ice slurry just a few hundred feet under the surface of the water is thousands of tons. Some guess 2, some guess 3, some guess 4,000 tons just in the Arctic. There are similar slurries of these methane crystals. They're called methane clathrates or methane hydrates along every continental shelf all around the world. And the aggregate is probably 30 or 40 million tons. And excuse me, I should be saying, I think it's billion tons.
I think it is billion, yes.
Yeah, billion tons. Put 3 more zeros in everything I just said. And that's what happened during the Permian mass extinction. Is there was this, and in fact, it looks like that's what happened with every mass extinction, including the minor ones like the TEPM, and that is that something slowly warms the planet, and it appears that in every one of these extinctions, except the asteroid one, it was massive volcanic activity, and it warms the planet up to a point where the organic material that over millions of years has decayed and fallen to the bottom of the sea and turned into methane crystals, just gotten frozen in with the water. When that melts, the sea literally starts to boil with methane gas coming out of it. And methane is 100 times more potent initially than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And that then spikes the atmosphere over a period of just a few years, and that kills off everything. And that's the big danger. And you got a lot of scientists who are very freaked out that an ice-free Arctic could mean that we are seeing increased levels of methane now coming out of the Arctic and coming out of Siberia, and there's some really, really spooky stuff on this.
And at the same time, we have the oil industry jubilant that now they're going to be able to drill there, and we have an administration that says, yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Tom, in about a minute, tell us, at what point do we start saying that the people who are lying to us, these politicians, the industry, the biostitutes, the political whores, and the scientific whores that are saying there's no problem here, at what point do we start treating them like criminals? Because this is mass murder ultimately.
Yeah, I think we start right now. I very much agree with the Pope that this is not just bad behavior. And it's not just bad behavior based on greed. It's bad behavior based on greed within an institution of unregulated capitalism that not only allows it, but encourages it. So not only do we have to start publicly shaming these guys, but we have to change the structure, the system itself, so that unregulated capitalism doesn't rule the world.
And at some point, people have to go to jail for the things they do. When they commit fraud in scientific reports, that should be a jailable offense. It used to be, and we changed all that. We forgot it. Tom, thank you for joining me. As usual, just extraordinary information. That's why people watch your program so faithfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Pap. It's great to be with you.
Ring of Fire is always on. Radio, YouTube, social media, and news. The news stories that